This is The Catholic Current with Father Robert Matei.
Hey, you know what would be a great idea? Let's denature the church. What's the selling point for that?
What Archbishop Vigano has alleged is that there are some enemies within the church who essentially want to turn the church into a kind of ecumenical, nondescript, vague religion of the New World Order, religion of the one world government.
So kind of an NGO or the chaplaincy to the UN?
Exactly.
Praise be Jesus Christ. This is Father Robert McTague of the Society of Jesus, your daily host for the Catholic Current, where we bring Christ to the world and the world to Christ. You're listening to us from the Station of the Cross Studios, your local radio station and the iCatholic Radio mobile app, where we proclaim the fullness of truth with clarity and charity. As always, let's start with prayer. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Almighty God, through the intercession of St. Ignatius Loyola, we ask that you pour forth your Holy Spirit upon us, a spirit of discernment, that we might hear your voice and obey your command. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Well, friends, like everyone else, we have lots to say about COVID, and you know my limitations. I'm a specialist in medical ethics. I am not a doctor. I don't give medical advice, but we do have to talk about formation of conscience and law in relation to COVID. So we've got to be talking about vaccine mandates, who's issuing them and why, who's pushing back and why. Updating on this is a first-time guest. She is an award-winning journalist, writer, a radio talk show host heard in Seattle. Listen to her twice weekly with her Adult in the Room podcast. I do like that title. And she's also a writer for PJ Media. Victoria Taft, welcome to the Catholic Current.
Well, thank you so much, Father. It's a joy to be here. And I appreciated your prayer.
Oh, certainly. Thank you. That's part of what we do here. Victoria, we remember when My Body, My Choice was a rallying cry and you could not possibly argue against it in any way. And now we're getting, hey, your body, our choice. Cooperate with vaccine mandates or else. And again, I'm not a doctor, you're not a doctor, but I want to talk about the culture of the mandate and the powers behind it. What have you been finding? You've been writing about this for months. What have you been seeing and hearing?
I think that there's a colossal amount of groupthink going on with the respect to those people in power, whether they be in power at the local level, state level, and federal level. There's sort of a mindset, and if you don't agree with that mindset, you are an outlier, you are an other, and you should be silenced. And by the groupthink, I mean their unwillingness to take a look at information that does not comport with their preconceived notions. It's things that are sort of, that are, for example, the idea of the vaccine not actually being a vaccine, to the extent that they had to redefine vaccine at the CDC. And the idea that it is essentially a therapeutic, but you are now being told that other therapeutics that will help you should COVID befall you, you can't take those. And those are bad. But this one's good because we're putting the magic label of vaccine on that. So this mindset prevails. This mindset it prevails now, and they won't loose it until such time that there are so many people who defy this mandate, and there are other people who begin mocking them for their, for lack of a better word, stupidity for believing in these falsehoods surrounding this vaccine. There are many good things, I'm sure, about these vaccines. I'm not a medical expert. I'm certainly no bioethicist as you are. But I do know when I'm being hoodwinked, and I do know when somebody, the same people who told me that Donald Trump was a Russian spy who went along with that entire subset of groupthink talking points were absolutely wrong, and then just went about their business when it was uncovered that they had conceived of and carried out this plot against the president, for lack of a better word, a better example. And so I don't think they're that smart, and I think we need to push back. And that's why I write what I write.
Well, I'm glad for it. My hermeneutic of suspicion is engaged. And whenever we have we're from the government and we're here to help, I tend to brace for impact when I hear that. But, Governor Newsom of California, wants to be mandating it for school children, hasn't got his own minor daughter injected yet. And we see this time and again. There seems to be an enthusiasm and elan for telling people what to do. Australia, in a matter of months, has become absolutely dystopian. I remember when the COVID interruption began, and a prominent police chief, I forget what major city was, well, he's giving his talk talking about if you don't give your papers over at the checkpoint, we'll break the window and drag you out of the car for your own health.
Yes.
And behind him is a banner said, "Staying apart keeps us together." And
Yes.
I said, well,
Oh
remember
gosh.
when 1984 was fiction?
It's so dystopian. Oh, I know. Exactly. Remember when 1984 was fiction? Somebody
Right.
sent me a picture of himself wearing a mask, and on it says 1984 the other day. I'm going to get some for Christmas for people. And
Assuming they can make deliveries for Christmas, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You know, so can I just interject something here?
Sure, please.
Because the whole COVID, the COVID horrors and the dystopian tales and the supply chain things. I've told my kids that we're going to make things this Christmas, and my kids are grown adults who are bringing up children in this milieu, and I said we're going to make stuff. So I'm trying to find bottles that I can buy to put the stuff I'm making to give away my things to my children and others. It's hard. You can't find anything.
Right.
You can find a bottle, but you can't find a lid. I mean, the whole supply chain is interrupted. It's here we are.
Right. You know, as William Butler Yeats said, things fall apart, the center cannot hold. Friends, I'm talking with journalist and radio host and podcast host Victoria Taft. Check out her good work at PJ Media and the Adult in the Room podcast. Victoria, one of the things that really concerns me is, the rallying cry of never let a good crisis go to waste. And whatever we thought we knew about COVID a year and a half ago, we know a whole lot more. And it turns out the first few chapters of the story, if they were not economical with the truth, they were at least rather thrifty with the truth. Those emergency powers, apparently once you get a hold of them, you never want to let them go. Is that part of your concern too, is that the bureaucracy is gearing up, seeing this as a matchless opportunity?
As a one target to point to, the emergency powers are the biggest thing. We have, of course, all this cavalcade of other stuff that arises as a result of using the emergency powers. But if you could claw back the emergency powers from all of the governors and all of the county health officials, and you could do that. For example, in Washington, Republicans wanted to do that, but the governor would not convene the legislature so that could be accomplished and the case could be made. And in California, much the same situation. We don't have an emergent problem anymore. We don't. It's now an endemic, I think. This virus is endemic to the population. And I think that the fact that they don't want to count people who have already had it bespeaks that truth, frankly. Right. They don't want to include those people who have already had COVID in the numbers. But that's sort of an aside. But the emergency powers are it's the true north, and we need to get rid of those. I mean, and you cannot say, in lots of lawsuits that have been filed do make the case, not that they're being observed or listened to, but they make the case that this is no longer an emergent situation. This is, we're in January, we will be a full 2 years out, and we are still in an emergency. Well, you know what? No. I'd like to go back, and I haven't done this. I'd like to know how many years we actually had to use rationing stamps during World War II. Was it the entire length of the war? Was it when we were just gearing up, when we needed more rubber, when we needed other supplies to supply the troops? Was it the entire length of the war? I mean, that was an emergency. Right. This not so much anymore.
Well, I know that at the federal level, we're still in a state of emergency because of 9/11 20 years ago.
Exactly.
So
we still have the AUMF already listed.
Yes, and it boggles me that everyone's life is subject to the fiat of a county health official. They say you should know who's on your board of education. I don't know who my county health official is. I'm almost certain that I won't like this person because, again, of the enthusiasm of issuing diktats. So the idea that all these people have your best interests at heart and you're just too stupid to figure that out. I get a knee-jerk reaction when I have people that I want to dig up a quote, maybe we can read it in the next segment, from C.S. Lewis, who said, "The worst kind of tyranny is for the people who are doing this for your own good." So I'll mention that in the next segment. Friends, when we come back, we're going to continue our conversation with Victoria Taft. She's an award-winning journalist, writer, and a terrestrial radio talk show host based out of Seattle. Listen to her twice-weekly podcast called the Adult in the Room podcast. And also check out her good work in PJ Media. In the next segment, we're going to talk about who's pushing back against the vaccine mandates and why. After the broadcast today, go to thestationofthecross.com, get our resources list, download our audio as podcast. Remember, our rallying cry here at the Catholic Current is Christus Mundo, Mundus Christo, bringing Christ to the world and the world to Christ. We do it because our Lord says so, for the greater glory of God, the love of our neighbor, and the salvation of our own soul. Everything you need to bring this conversation to your family and friends, we give to you. Together, we can take it around the world. We can do it with you. We cannot do it without you. Let's get busy. Start a conversation with your family and friends. Keep the conversation going. It's the only way forward. Friends, we'll be back in just 2 minutes. Please do stay with us. This is Jesuit Father Robert McTague, your daily host of the Catholic Current. Join me on Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern for our special Friday format. Let's talk about this. I'll start with the question, are you a domestic terrorist? The government's answer may surprise you. Then we'll wrap up with weekend readiness, reviewing the week's headlines in light of the upcoming Sunday scriptures, so you'll be all prayed up for Sunday Mass. That's Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern on the Catholic Current, coming to you from the Station of the Cross and the iCatholic Radio mobile app.
You're listening to the Catholic Current with Father Robert McTague from the Station of the Cross Catholic Media Network. Stay connected with the show, our guests and topics, by following the show on Twitter and Gab. Just search for The Catholic Current.
Praise be Jesus Christ. This is Father Robert McTague of the Society of Jesus, your daily host for the Catholic Current, where we bring Christ to the world and the world to Christ. You're listening to us from the Station of the Cross Studios, your local radio station, and the iCatholic Radio mobile app, where we proclaim the fullness of truth with clarity and charity. We're talking about the culture of vaccine mandates. My guest is Victoria Taft, journalist, writer, radio host. Check out her good work at PJ Media and her podcast called The Adult in the Room podcast. Victoria, I want to start with a quote from C.S. Lewis, who's just a goldmine of quotable quotes. He says this, "Of all tyrannies, a tyranny sincerely exercised for the good of its victims may be the most oppressive. It would be better to live under robber barons than under omnipotent moral busybodies. The robber baron's cruelty may sometimes sleep. His cupidity may at some point be satiated. But those who torment us for our own good will torment us without end, for they do so with the approval of their own conscience." So says C.S. Lewis. What are your thoughts on that observation?
Wow. Well, I don't think they'll ever be satiated.
Alas, so yeah. He's a bit of an optimist there.
I just don't. I think that there are people who, as I say, the mindset, the groupthink that goes on here will say that they're doing it for your own good, which reminds me of that H.L. Mencken quote that you've probably heard a million times, the urge to save humanity is almost always a false front for the urge to rule.
Yes.
And that is precisely what's going on here. It is that the robber barons that are in charge now who believe that... Let me just say one thing before I go too far afield. I think people forget that the people who are in government are people, and they are fallen people just like we are. And they are victim to the same whims, vicissitudes, and all sorts of things that we ourselves fall victim to. And what we need to do is we need to remind people that people are greedy, and people who run governments are greedy. Hence, I need more money for this particular charitable program that I want to give your money to. And they are insatiable in their desire for more. If I don't do it, no one else will do this for themselves. So I just really think we need to remind people, we need to remind your listeners, and I know they're smart people and they know, obviously, they listen to your show, but that we're fallen, and so are they.
Yes.
And they are not any smarter than we are. And we need to just say, look, you get out of my way. I will direct my path with the help of the Lord and his leading, not yours. You are not my overseer. And it's
the bureaucrats have structurally, they have no interest in saying, my work is done here. Let me give back the rest of the money and cancel the program. That never happens. That's not that. I can go far afield about why we need charity rather than bureaucrats, but that's another topic for another time. Paraphrasing Abraham Lincoln, he said,
parcel.
Yes. But paraphrasing Abraham Lincoln, he says that you think to really know a man, watch what he does under pressure, and he says, but if you really want to have a man's character revealed, give him power. And happily, some people are pushing back. You've been doing a number of stories of groups and individuals pushing back and sometimes paying a terrible price for exercising their conscience and their good judgment regarding the vaccine mandates. Fill us in on what you've been finding.
I've talked to many people, sotto voce, and one I just spoke to the other day about what's going on in his life. And it's on this week's Adult in the Room podcast, as a matter of fact. It's that UCLA physician. He's an anesthesiologist who has privileges at several of the UCLA Medical Center places and is, in fact, on staff there, or was, until he was escorted away from the building last Monday and told that he was no longer needed there because he refused to get the vaccine. And he said at the time, he said, this is the price of freedom. And this is the price of conscience. He's a Christian man. I had him on yesterday, and the very last thing he did was say to me, how can I pray for you? And he prayed over us, just as you did in advance of our communication today. And it's so refreshing to hear that in a public space, frankly. Right. So what happened to him is he's lost his job. And he is part and parcel of a group. He started a group that is about the freedom for several people, many people. He's got 450 people, part of his group, whose name escapes me at the moment, but I'll get it for you. And he has decided to push back. His wife's also a physician at the same medical center, and she got a religious exemption. And I said, why didn't you get a religious exemption? And he says, I could get one in a heartbeat. But the problem is that if they take an inch, they take a mile. How dare they tell me that I can be exempt from a shot that they shouldn't even be ordering right now? This is absurd. And it reminded me of that old saw, that old story about how a man asks a woman if she would stay with him if he pays her, an exorbitant sum, let's say $1 million, and she says, yeah. And then he says, well, what would you do for $5? And she says, oh, good sir, what kind of woman do you think I am? To which he responds, we've already established that. We're just haggling over the price.
Right. Yes, and indeed.
And that's our rights in a nutshell.
Right. Friends, I'm speaking.
What are we willing to give up?
Yes, indeed. Friends, I'm speaking with journalist Victoria Taft. We're talking about vaccine mandates, who's pushing against them and why. I'm glad you mentioned the issue of conscience, because in my work with doctors, and I've been to professional conferences where people running around swapping their favorite formulas for conscience clauses, like they're swapping recipes at a Christmas party for cookies. My take on conscience clause is this. It's a lot like someone in an abusive relationship getting a restraining order. I can't get beaten now. I have this magic piece of paper. All right, maybe that'll help you sleep at night. Maybe that'll buy you some time as long as people acknowledge the magic piece of paper. But when I look at Australia and I see grandmothers thrown to the ground and pepper sprayed by police in riot gear, then I'm not really very sanguine about conscience clauses. What are your thoughts on conscience? Is that our last best hope? Is it just getting the troops off the beach at Dunkirk? Does it buy us time?
It might. I just think that it might buy a little time, but the fact of the matter is a lot of those conscience clauses are going out the window. In California, they're not even allowing them. I mean, can you imagine that? They're not even allowing those. In Washington State, just did a story about the fire marshal who will no longer have a job because he cannot get the shot. And so they've said, well, this is a new trick. Now listen to this little ditty here from the state of Washington, which has, by the way, the worst conscience clause, worst religious exemption in the whole world. But be that as it may, this is about a medical exemption. They told him, we will give you a medical exemption. I'm sorry, but we cannot accommodate it, however. Now, what's that? That's you know what that is? That's an overactive lawyer going, well, we're going to get in trouble, legally speaking, if we don't give this guy an exemption, a medical exemption, because it's not going to be good for him. However, we'll just say we can't accommodate the exemption. Yeah, that's it. Washington State's exemption for religious reasons is boiled down to two questions. One is, what religion are you? And the other one is, and have you ever taken as an adult, a vaccine of any kind? And if you answer in the affirmative to the second question, you're no longer allowed to use the religious exemption. I mean, it's just absurd.
Well, I wonder what theologian they consulted. I'm looking at your I'm looking at your article in PJ Media from September 20th regarding the religious exemption form at Cedars-Sinai Hospital. And oh my goodness, can you provide written documentation from a third party to support your religious beliefs? Have you detected a particular hostility towards religion in the time of the COVID interruption?
Oh, heavens, yes. When you can keep open abortion clinics but close churches, when liquor stores and pot stores are open but you close churches, we have a disdain for Christianity during this COVID time, and it's dark. And this is the reason, it's the fundamental reason I am at a level that I don't even want to take my blood pressure. I operate my day in barely contained rage over this. Mm-hmm. And I know I shouldn't, because as Christians, we're not supposed to worry. God tells us, Jesus tells us, don't worry. His eye's on the sparrow. Okay, great. In the meantime, my blood's boiling over this because it's such an affront to my beliefs. And it's such an affront to anyone who may hold a different belief than mine, but in good conscience does not want to take this medicine. And in fact, the person about that story has never gotten back to me because they're afraid of being outed. Right. It's at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, and the questions are your membership. They want to know your membership. They can't ask that. Right. They can't even ask that. The nature of your beliefs. What are the nature of your beliefs? Well, what do I say that will pass muster with the clerical people they have on staff to determine whether or not my religion good enough will measure up to their standards? Where and how you adhere to these beliefs? Where do you do it? Well, what if you just do it at home? Well, I'm sorry, we don't let you just do it at home. And by the way, where were they supposed to be doing it? Because churches are barely back open. When you first begin to embrace these beliefs, as if that's germane to the conversation. I mean, sure. I mean, if we're having a conversation about it, I was saved when I was 14 years old. I mean, what is that to you? Nothing. Right. Nothing. And of course, it goes on, those questions. I mean, you're right to be outraged about those questions. But yet, do you think I can find an attorney that will? I talked to Harmeet Dillon, and she's quoted in the story. She goes, well, a lot of people are using that as an excuse and this and that. I go, yeah, but this seems unquestionably illegal to me. This is a religious test for employment. Now, you and I both know there are religious tests for employment.
Oh, yes.
Under the RFRA, if you're at Christian school, you don't have to hire a satanic church member. We got that.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't, but you can't do that in the public space like this. You can't do that. Are you going to religiously test every one of your employees? No, just the people who want to take that step to say, no, I want an exemption. So here we have a perfect example writ large of what happens if you invoke the religious test or religious exemption. Exactly what you said.
Well, some years ago I wrote an article about whether faithful Catholic doctors will become safe, legal, and rare. I'm afraid I may have to update that article. Friends, when we come back, we're going to continue our conversation with journalist Victoria Taft. Check out her good work at PJ Media and her twice-weekly podcast called Adult in the Room Podcast. The next segment, we're going to talk about the side effects of mandates. Be careful what you wish for. After the broadcast today, go to thestationofthecross.com, get our resources list, download our audio as podcast. We're over on 100 different platforms and more. Wherever you can find audio, you can find us, download, spread it around, write a 5-star review, subscribe to your favorite platform. We need to attract the attention of the algorithm so these conversations get the attention they deserve. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
This is the Catholic Current from the Station of the Cross Catholic Media Network. Catch up on an episode you've missed or share them with your family or friends. The Catholic Current is podcasted wherever you enjoy listening. Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, and the iCatholic Radio mobile app.
Praise be Jesus Christ. This is Father Robert McTeigue of the Society of Jesus, your daily host for the Catholic Current, where we bring Christ to the world and the world to Christ. You're listening to us from the Station of the Cross Studios, your local radio station and the iCatholic Radio mobile app, where we proclaim the fullness of truth with clarity and charity. We're talking about vaccine mandates, who's pushing back and why. My guest is Victoria Taft. She's an award-winning journalist, writer, radio talk host heard in Seattle. Check out her good work on her Adult in the Room podcast and her writing at PJ Media. Victoria, I got out of Florida just a few hours before the flights were canceled because air traffic controllers were walking out. Southwest pilots weren't flying. The airline said it was because of the weather, which by all accounts was fair weather. What are you seeing in terms of unintended consequences or side effects to these vaccine mandates?
Well, I think you have to question the premise. Is it unintended? And I think that's something we have to worry about. And what we have is a wave of people who are being washed out of their jobs. The whole Southwest Airlines pilot situation, as I understand it, is that the pilots were told on December 8th they have to have a shot or they're out. So they can't carry over vacation, they can't carry over sick time, so they're taking it all now. Mm-hmm. And that ought to give people pause. The air traffic controllers in Jacksonville, I mean, they didn't have enough to run that area.
Right.
And so those are they unintended? I mean, I'm glad those people are standing up for the rest of us to show that there are people out there willing to do what's really hard to do that.
Right.
That UCLA doctor, that's really hard to do that.
Right.
And no one is standing up for him. No one is standing up for him.
You know, some of my more cynical friends suggest this, that the recipe is precipitate the crisis until desperate, frightened people call to be rescued. And then the rescuers come, and all they want is a little bit more of your money and a little bit more of your freedom. And to really keep you in a state of upset, they want to have villains. You know, the governor of New York preaching, and I use that word deliberately because Yahoo News said that her speech from a church was a homily. This Catholic woman was given a homily at a non-Catholic church, and you know the vaccines are a gift from God, and you are my apostles. You're the smart ones, and you know there are people who are not vaccinated, and you know who they are. So the villain in this drama is the vaccine hesitant. She's proudly wearing her vaccine pendant I know there are schools that you wear color-coded wristbands depending upon your vaccine status. I know a little bit about history. This is not trending in a direction that makes me feel at ease. So you're going to have a panic. There's going to be an offer to be rescued. The price is just power and money, and there are going to be villains for you to dump your rage on, and there's going to be opportunity to signal virtue. What can go wrong?
When Joe Biden gave his 2 speeches in which he, and probably more, in which he marginalized the people who have not yet gotten a vaccine and telling them that this was a pandemic of the unvaccinated, which of course on its face is not true. He green-lighted a lot of Karens out there to go after people like me, who I haven't had a vaccine yet. I do have a problem with it. If I were to get one, I'd probably get the J&J one. But anyway, I think that this othering of people that they claim to have been opposed to for all these years is frightening to me. I mean, you see it in Australia. I mean, those are the kinds of things that will happen. And you see it when you go to New York and want to go to a restaurant. No, you can't. In Los Angeles, you have to have a vaccine passport to go to the gym. These things on their face make no sense, right? Mm-hmm. So they don't make sense. These are frightening people. They've been given cover to go after people. I'll tell you an example this is early in the pandemic. And I went to the hardware store, one of my favorite stores in the little town. We are unfortunately moving away and going to a different place. And it was my last trip to the store, and I just needed drain cleaner because I wanted to make sure the drains worked well for the new person. And they wouldn't let me get it because I'd forgotten my mask. They wouldn't let me do it. And before too long, one person said, "Hey, where's your mask?" I go, "Well, I'm just going to grab it and I'm going to get out." I had just put all my stuff down at the checkout. I ran back to get the drain cleaner, and one person said it, and I go, I forgot it or something, and can I just get the drain cleaner? Before too long, and I'm not even exaggerating, there were 6 or 7 people who worked there and customers surrounding me, telling me that I was dangerous. They were all masked. Now, that makes absolutely no sense. There was no danger to them. And I was, of course, not symptomatic. And it like a pack of hyenas. And I was just dumbfounded at the mass stupidity being exampled in front of me. I was just shocked. I was in a state of shock. I thought about bringing out my camera, and I go, well, if I bring out my phone, I'm just going to make it even worse. They'll probably beat me up. You can escalate. Yeah. One person pushed me.
Oh.
It's unbelievable.
Well, that anxiety has to go somewhere. I want to draw an analogy. There have been studies that indicated that kids get themselves all worked up with a virtual reality game or a video game, and they pump all that adrenaline, and if they don't go run out and do something, they just get sick. I think we've got people in such a state of anxiety and grief and even anger that they're looking for people to be lightning rods, people to be scapegoats, and I think before long, it's going to get ugly. Friends, I'm speaking with journalist Victoria Taft. Check out her good work at PJ Media and her twice-weekly podcast called the Adult in the Room podcast. I was traveling this spring, and I was at an airport, and all I wanted was a cup of coffee. So I went to the Dunkin' Donuts at the airport, and I was told, oh, no cash, because it might have cooties on it. I had to use touch my card to the machine. But right next to it was a large jar where the staff was asking for cash tips.
Yep.
I look at the person next to me whose mask was so sheer that his beard and mustache were protruding through the mask. Mm-hmm. But it was okay because his mouth and nose were covered. So again, I'm not a medical
in
doctor, but
theater.
there seems to be a lot of theater. Let's speculate a little bit, Victoria. I've heard some rumblings that the next group of people to be pushing back isn't teachers; it's going to be truck drivers. Most people don't appreciate how absolutely dependent the majority of the country is for life support in terms of the trucks rolling. And if the trucks stop rolling for 72 hours, we're in a world of hurt, and it's hard to recover. Have you heard any rumblings about different industries, besides nurses and doctors, planning to go out on strike or to go
Teachers.
slow or keep the trucks from rolling?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, my son-in-law is a person who does logistics and needs truck drivers. He moves different products throughout the country, and it's harder than all get out to find an empty truck and a truck driver willing. Now, what he ends up doing is he uses independent truck drivers, not huge companies. It works better for him. So I guess that doesn't impact him as much. The COVID overlay of this whole thing doesn't impact him as much. The lack of truck drivers, there's a dearth of truck drivers out there because for whatever reason, I just don't, I guess it doesn't pay as much or what have you. These guys are rolling in it, but literally and figuratively. But so I haven't heard about the truck drivers, but I can tell you, I mean, obviously we have the logistical problems at the ports of entry.
Right.
We got 100 ships container ships off the coast at Long Beach. I don't even know what's going on there. I just know they can't get them unloaded, and that they're I think a Home Depot former official, as well as I can't remember what other big highfalutin job he'd had, but he knows logistics. He goes, this is a national emergency. We need to get the military down there to unload these container ships, which I find very interesting. Going back to trucks, I heard the other day, I don't know if this is apocryphal or what have you, however, if you're at a large grocery store, they receive truck deliveries 8 times a day. Now, if you go from 8 times a day to 1, you've got a shortage of stuff.
Right. This bodes ill for all sorts of reasons. And, part of it, what boggles me and concerns me is the fickleness of it all. Do you remember when people were exhorted to stand outside and applaud the British Health Service, and there were the big billboards, a lot of heroes don't wear capes. And these are the people who went in and were brave, and this was even before the vaccine, and they stayed on the job, et cetera, et cetera. And now they're the villains, and they're expendable, and they're fireable. Doesn't that strike you as odd?
It does. Does anyone notice? I mean, I think a lot of people notice, but will anyone say it out loud enough so that the world can hear it? This is absurd. These are same people, same uninformed goofball people making those decisions about not letting me get the drain cleaner are the people in charge or the folks who have the loudest voices. In a lawsuit, a friend of mine, Robert Barnes, is a lawyer, and he has put on his site, vivabarneslaw.locals.com, a letter that talks about both the medical as well as religious mandate ideas that you, in a letter form, that people can avail themselves of. And one of the things that this letter talks about is the fact that if you're talking about people who are symptomatic, they're going to stay home. And if you're talking about that, and that could happen to either people who have been vaccinated. Now we know the vaccines don't work for everyone, especially against the Delta variant. And the Delta variant is a direct result of those vaccines. So you've got that, but nobody says that. Nobody says that out loud. It's pretty shocking. But the other thing is that, so you don't want us to come to work because you're afraid that in toto, asymptomatic people will somehow interfere, infect someone with a vaccine. That's what you want to protect against with these vaccine mandates, because that's the nutshell of it. You want so as the letter goes, the symptomatic can be self-isolated. Hence, requiring vaccinations only addresses one risk: dangerous or deadly transmission by an asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic employee in an employment setting. Yet even a government official, Dr. Fauci, as scientific studies affirm, asymptomatic transmission is exceedingly very rare. Indeed, initial data suggests that vaccinated are just as or even more likely to transmit the virus as the asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic. Hence, the vaccine and its mandate solves nothing.
Right. I mean, there are people who may be vaccinated and still contagious, but we're not testing them. And then meanwhile, while we're mandating people getting tested, it's a free-for-all at the southern border as people being loaded up on buses and scattered about the country, and their vaccine status is unknown, and they haven't been tested. So, again, I'm not a medical doctor, but my hermeneutic of suspicion is very much engaged. Friends, we come back, we're going to continue our conversation with journalist Victoria Taft. We're talking about vaccine mandates. We're going to be talking about, let's not just get anxious. Let's do something smart and good. Check out her good work at PJ Media and her podcast, Adult in the Room Podcast. Be part of the conversation. Follow what we're following by following us on Gab. That's GAB.com. Our channel is The Catholic Current. Everything you need to take this conversation to your family and friends we give to you. Together, let's take it around the world. We'll be back in just 2 minutes. Please do stay with us.
The definition of critical theory is in the very term itself, criticizing everything. From start to finish, critical theory is an unrelenting, unremitting attack upon all traditional institutions. As a result, Marxist critical theory brings about much self-hate and cultural pessimism in the population that is under attack.
Sermons for Everyday Living, weekdays from 6 to 7 a.m. Eastern on the Station of the Cross.
After today's broadcast, go to the Catholic Current show page on thestationofthecross.com for info on today's guests, the show resource links, and to sign up for our weekly email of upcoming shows.
Praise be Jesus Christ. This is Father Robert McTeigue of the Society of Jesus, your daily host for the Catholic Current, where we bring Christ to the world and the world to Christ. You're listening to us from the Station of the Cross Studios, your local radio station and the iCatholic Radio mobile app, where we proclaim the fullness of truth with clarity and charity. We're talking about vaccine mandates and pushing back. My guest is Victoria Taft. She's an award-winning journalist, writer, radio talk show host in Seattle. Check out her good work at PJ Media and her Adult in the Room podcast. You know, Victoria, there are people. I think of Mark Twain who said, "Everyone complains about the weather, but no one actually does anything about it." We've been complaining, we've been kvetching, as my friends back in New York would say, about the vaccine mandates. We don't want to just get people riled up. We want people to take positive action. I have some of my own ideas what that might look like. What's that on your view?
I think that if you are going to be subject to these vaccine mandates, you need to involve yourself in a lawsuit because the fact of the matter is they don't pay attention to anything. They're gonna haul you out like they do those people in Loudoun County, Virginia, at the school board meeting.
Yeah.
You will be perceived as a domestic terrorist. So therefore, you need to become involved. And there are lots of lawsuits going on. And Liberty Counsel is among those. There's others. I was just looking at another one that is just brought by, let me just double check by another group. Well, a lot of the Christian groups,
Right.
Thomas More Society.
Right.
And so those guys, those people are doing really good work. And also, just so people will know, Father, God's bigger than this.
Mm-hmm.
But here on terrestrial Earth here, and we have to fight back. And the law is the best way to do that. The left has weaponized the legal system against us in so many ways. And the only way that they can continue to have this advantage, if you will, in this space, this COVID space, is to continue to glean or hang on to the emergency powers at the state level, and to highlight, and we need to talk about it. We need to actually get involved and talk about it and show up to low-level meetings, public meetings, and write letters to the press, if you will, and talk about it on social media if you're not afraid of Facebook. And just remember, and I was telling you earlier that the Martin Niemöller, as the Nazis approached them in the Confessing Church, he gave his sermon, and he said, "We have no more thought of using our own powers to escape the arms of authorities than had the apostles of old. No more are we ready to keep silent at man's behest when God commands us to speak. For it is and must remain the case that we must obey God rather than man." Amen. And, just remember what your job is, people.
Well, yes, we have to remember, who we are and whose we are. And I think we need short-term, mid-term, and long-term plans. Short-term, be informed. Know who your lawyers are, know who your allies are, and then midterm, you need to have a plan. You need to have resources, and then really the long term is we need to form communities. We need to form like-minded communities. I think what Andrew Torba is doing on Gab was he built his own platform. He runs his own service. He can't be canceled. And he's setting up job boards for people who need to be employed by folks who are not requiring the revelation of vaccine status, et cetera. So I think that is the way to go. This I don't have a crystal ball, neither do you. But looking ahead for the rest of the calendar year of 2021, how do you think the COVID crisis is going to go forward?
I think we're going to have a limited supply of things we need. I think we're going to continue with the stupidity of lockdowns. In some cases, Dr. Fauci needs to go. We need to get rid of the emergency powers that all the governors have. This has ceased to be an emergent issue. We need to make sure that we are back in control at the most local level possible of our own lives and our own civic life as well. Those are things that I hope we can do. But you're right. Resources, food, the whole prepper thing.
Right.
It sounds kind of crazy, but I don't know about you, but gas has gone up.
Oh, yes.
Over $1 a gallon, just since Joe Biden took over and said, I don't like gas. And all of a sudden people run for the hills. He gets rid of pipelines and that sort of thing. The very thing that we need for productivity, energy, is being diminished.
Right.
That is wrong, and people need to say so. And so I would try to get as much gas as you can and load up all your cars if you have multiple cars. And some repository, maybe there's someone in your neighborhood who can do that. You're right. And I know it sounds kind of crazy, but I think that it might get that tight. I think it might get that tight.
Well, there's.
I don't know what else. Pray.
Well, yes. I mean, be in right relationship with God. If you're Catholic, go to confessions. Make sure that you stay in a state of grace, because we have challenging times coming. Inflation is, I think, at a 13-year high. I think that's the kind of thing that we need to talk about. There was a time when our homes were places of production, and now it's a place of consumption and maybe a place of entertainment. And I think we need to have homes that are places for families to bond and to pray together and to get together with like-minded folks and say, hey, if we had to have a worship service in your house, what would that look like? One doesn't like to think
Right.
about these things, but I think that we're at that point where we do have to begin to plan ahead. That winter is coming, and not only chronologically and literally, but maybe metaphorically as well. You've been fighting the good fight for a long time. You've been looking at hard things. Are there ever days where you just want to hit the snooze button and have the world go away? I mean, obviously you don't do that. I know you're tempted to do that because we're limited. We're human. But what gets you out of bed and doing this kind of work even when you're not feeling it?
Oh, wow. Somebody's got to tell it. I'm going to tell it. I choose stories that I feel I can make a contribution to. And the other thing I do is I've been working a garden.
Okay.
We just moved here recently. I've been literally working in my garden, and we have food, and I'm putting up that food. And I'm just going, you know what? I actually might need that food this year. So that gives me solace, and it gives me a place to commune with nature and that sort of thing. And I think the house church movement's going to grow exponentially this year.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
just like with homeschooling.
Yes.
I think people have figured it out about homeschooling, and I think people are going to be figuring it out about the home church movement as well. And as a cleric in America, I never thought, but saying that, and I've been a priest almost 25 years. I never thought I'd have an Easter service by myself in my room in America. And yet I have. So lots of things are possible. Victoria Taft, PJ Media, Adult in the Room podcast. God bless your good work. It's been a great conversation. I look forward to the next one soon.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it, Father.
I'm Jesuit Father Robert McTeigue. Join us tomorrow. It's Friday. It's going to be you and me with Let's Talk About This. I'm going to ask you this question. Are you a domestic terrorist? You might be surprised by that answer. And then it'll be Week in Readiness, you and me reviewing the headlines of the week in light of the upcoming Sunday scriptures, so you'll be all prayed up for Sunday Mass. After the broadcast, go to thestationofthecross.com, get our resources list, download our audio as podcast. Through the intercession of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, may God bless you, keep you from all harm and every evil, to reach the happiness of heaven. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, go in peace, and please do pray for me.
Thank you for listening to this podcast brought to you by thestationofthecross.com, a listener-funded nonprofit organization. Please prayerfully consider donating at thestationofthecross.com by calling 1-877-888-6279 or through our free iCatholic Radio mobile app.